I'm standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, holding a stack of legal documents that cost me $12,000 to obtain, and my hands won't stop shaking. The papers are wrinkled from being clutched so many times over the past 72 hours. My ex-wife's mother, Karen, though I've taken to calling her the witch in my head, has locked me out of the house where my daughter lives. Not metaphorically, literally changed the locks. My 8-year-old, Emma, is inside that house right now, probably eating cereal at the kitchen table. And I'm out here in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, holding custody papers that apparently mean nothing because Karen didn't read them. Or worse, she read them and didn't care. That's when my phone buzzes. It's Detective Morrison from the Columbus Police Department. He wants to know if I'm available this morning. His voice on the voicemail sounds almost sympathetic, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. 3 years ago, everything was different. I was the guy with the plan. Michael Richardson, that's me, 38 years old, worked as a project manager for a commercial construction firm, made decent money, had a wife who laughed at my jokes, and a daughter who still thought I was a superhero. We'd bought this house in Worthington, this beautiful 2-story colonial with the oak trees out front, back in 2019. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a mortgage that felt manageable. I'd worked for 11 years to get there. 11 years of staying late, skipping lunches, listening to my boss drone on about quarterly earnings. Ashley was the kind of woman who made you believe in luck. We met at a coffee shop in 2015. I know, it's cliché, but it's true. She was in line behind me, and I'd ordered the wrong drink, and she laughed when I made a face at the barista. That laugh. I remember thinking I'd order wrong drinks for the rest of my life if it meant hearing that sound again. We got married in 2017. Emma was born in 2016, actually. Surprise pregnancy, not planned, but I wouldn't change it for anything. We moved into the Worthington house the year after. For a solid 5 years, it felt like I'd won some cosmic lottery. Sunday mornings with Emma jumping on the bed, Ashley making her famous chocolate chip pancakes. The 3 of us piled under a blanket watching Disney movies. I had the 401k, the health insurance, the credit score hovering around 780. I even joined the HOA. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but I was into it. Wanted the neighborhood to look nice for Emma's birthday parties. We'd throw them in our backyard, and there'd be 12 kids running around, and parents standing by the fence with beers. And for those afternoons, my life felt like something out of a catalog. Ashley had always been a little close with her mom, Karen. Too close, maybe. They talked on the phone 3 times a week. Karen would pop over on Saturdays with groceries or casseroles. I'd smile through it, bite my tongue. That's nice of her, I'd say, even when Karen made comments about how I wasn't taking out the trash in a timely manner, or how the lawn could use another fertilizer treatment. Things started shifting around 18 months ago. Ashley became distant. Nothing dramatic at first, just the kind of distance that creeps in like a slow leak. She'd be on her phone more. She'd say, "I need some space." And I'd think, okay, everyone needs space sometimes. I suggested we try counseling. She said she'd think about it. I bought flowers. I planned a weekend in Cincinnati. I asked her what was wrong, and she'd say, "Nothing, I'm just tired." Then one Wednesday in January, it was cold. I remember the freeze warning on the news. I came home and found her at the kitchen table with a lawyer's business card sitting next to her coffee mug. Just sitting there. Divorce papers were coming, she said quietly. She wasn't happy. She hadn't been happy for a while. She didn't want to make a big thing out of it. I felt something crack inside my chest. "Is there someone else?" I asked. I already knew the answer. She didn't answer, which was the answer. We separated for 6 months while the divorce process moved forward. I rented an apartment in Clintonville, 10 minutes from Emma. The custody agreement was supposed to be straightforward, 50-50 split, holidays alternating, both parents actively involved. The judge signed off on it. Seemed fair. Seemed like the kind of thing that would give Emma stability, even though her parents were falling apart. Then Karen got involved. It started small. Emma came back from a weekend with her mom saying, "Grandma says you're not paying child support properly." I was paying exactly what the court ordered. I had the receipts. I'd set up automatic transfers. But Karen had apparently decided I was the villain in this story, and she was going to convince everyone, especially Emma, that this was true. The comments evolved. "Your dad doesn't care enough to get you a new tablet." "Your dad missed your school recital because he's selfish." None of it was true. I'd been at the recital. The tablet thing was because I'd said we'd wait until her birthday, which was 2 months away. Ashley seemed checked out from all of it. She was with someone new by March, a guy named Derek who worked in finance, who drove a Range Rover, who had the kind of confident smile that made me want to punch something. She wasn't combative about the custody arrangement, but Karen was. Karen called me once and said, very calmly, that Emma would be better off if I stepped back and let the real family take care of her. I didn't step back. I showed up for every pickup. I went to every school event. I kept detailed records of everything: photographs, receipts, a calendar marked with every single moment I spent with my daughter. My lawyer, Jennifer Chun, told me I was being smart. "Document everything," she'd said. "People like Karen bank on you being too nice to fight back." But I wasn't nice anymore. I was scared. Last month, things escalated. Ashley and Derek got serious, engaged actually, which I found out through Emma's casual mention of Mommy and Derek's wedding. My daughter was going to walk down an aisle while I was still paying a mortgage on a house I no longer lived in. The anger was white hot and constant. Then, 2 weeks ago, everything stopped. Ashley called and said she wanted to modify the custody agreement. She wanted to give Karen temporary guardianship while she and Derek prepared for the wedding and their honeymoon to Cancun. 1 month. 4 weeks where I'd see Emma on weekends only, supervised by Karen. "That's not going to happen," I told her. "The court will approve it," Ashley said. "Karen's her grandmother. It's not unusual." It wasn't. That was the terrifying part. Family law judges do this kind of thing all the time. And I could afford a lawyer, but I couldn't afford to lose Emma, even for a month, to someone who was actively trying to turn her against me. So I fought. Jennifer filed a motion against the modification. We had a hearing. The judge, a woman named Patricia Mullins, who seemed tired of all of us, said she'd rule within 10 days. She seemed skeptical of Karen's motives, at least. That was something. What I didn't know, what I found out yesterday, was that Karen had decided she didn't need the judge's approval. She had her own plan. This morning, when I went to pick up Emma for my scheduled weekend, I found the locks changed. Karen opened the door, just barely, and told me that Emma wasn't available and that she'd see me in court. Then she slammed at the door and I heard the deadbolt click. I called Ashley. She didn't answer. I called her lawyer. He said he'd look into it, but that it wasn't technically his jurisdiction anymore. I called the non-emergency police line and reported it, and they said unless Emma was in immediate danger, there wasn't much they could do. It wasn't custodial interference, they explained, because Karen was technically Emma's grandmother and technically living in a house where Emma resided. That's when I stopped thinking clearly and started thinking like someone had just pushed me off a cliff. I called Jennifer at 10 p.m. and told her I needed an emergency protective order, and I needed it now. She told me to calm down, that we'd file first thing Monday morning. I told her it was Friday night. I told her my daughter was locked inside a house with someone who'd been poisoning her against me for months. She said there was nothing we could do until Monday. So I spent all weekend in my apartment in Clintonville, pacing, not sleeping, just thinking about Emma on the other side of town, wondering if I was going to call, wondering if I'd abandoned her. Saturday morning, I filed the paperwork myself. I found the forms online, and I hand-delivered them to the courthouse. By Saturday afternoon, I had an emergency custody order. By Sunday, I had a court-authorized document stating clearly that Emma was to be released to me immediately, that Karen had no legal authority, and that any violation would result in contempt of court charges. I printed it out, laminated it, held it like it was the Holy Grail. Monday morning at 6 a.m., I drove to the house in Worthington. I had the papers, I had my phone. I was going to get my daughter. I was going to walk up to that door, slide the court order under it or hand it to Karen directly, and I was going to bring Emma home. I didn't expect what happened next. I pulled up to the curb and there were already 2 police cars in the driveway. Denoy I Pavarot. I pulled up to the curb and there were already 2 police cars in the driveway. My stomach dropped. For a second, I thought something had happened to Emma, that Karen had let her fall or she was sick or my mind spiraled through every worst-case scenario. I parked behind the second cruiser and grabbed the laminated custody order from my passenger seat, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. A uniformed officer was standing on the porch, talking to Karen through the partially open door. Karen's face was red, her arms crossed. When she saw me getting out of the car, her expression shifted into something almost victorious, like she'd been waiting for me to arrive so she could prove something to the cops. "That's him," she said, pointing at me like I was evidence at a crime scene. I walked toward them, holding up the court order. "I have a custody document signed by Judge Patricia Mullins yesterday. I'm here to pick up my daughter." The officer turned to me. He was maybe 50, with the kind of exhausted face that said he'd been dealing with family disputes since 6 a.m. "Are you Michael Richardson?" "Yes, sir, I have—" "We got a call about an hour ago," he interrupted. "Your ex-wife called from her lawyer's office. Said you'd been making threats. Said you showed up at this residence yesterday and refused to leave. Said you were trying to take the child without proper authorization." The ground tilted beneath me. "That's not what happened," I said. "I came yesterday with a court order. Karen wouldn't answer the door. Karen changed the locks. I have documentation." I thrust the laminated papers toward him. "This is a custody order. I have legal authority to pick up my daughter right now." Karen made a sound like a bitter laugh. "He's been harassing us for weeks. Last night, he came here and pounded on the door, screaming. My granddaughter was terrified." I hadn't screamed. I'd knocked firmly, yes, and I'd called out Emma's name, but I hadn't screamed. But standing there on that driveway, with a police officer looking at me like I was the problem, I realized that my version of events didn't matter. What mattered was what Ashley and her lawyer had told the police before I got there. The officer looked at the custody order for maybe 5 seconds. "This looks legit," he said. "But the thing is, ma'am," he was looking at Karen, "you're the grandmother and you live here, so technically—" "Where's Emma?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my own. "I need to see my daughter." "She's inside," Karen said, "and she doesn't want to see you. She told me this morning she's scared of you." Something fractured in my chest. Emma, my 8-year-old, my daughter who'd made me a Father's Day card 2 months ago with glitter and hearts on it. My daughter who'd asked me last week if I could teach her to ride a bike without training wheels. She didn't want to see me. "Can I talk to her?" I asked the officer. He exchanged a look with his partner, a younger woman with her hand on her belt. "We can ask," she said, not unkindly, "but if the child doesn't want to come out, we can't force her." They went inside. I stood on that driveway for what felt like 3 hours, but was probably 4 minutes. Karen stayed in the doorway, watching me like she'd won something. Behind her, I could see into the living room, our living room, the one with the cream-colored couch I'd picked out, the TV we'd watched Christmas movies on. Emma appeared between the 2 officers, still in her pajamas, purple ones with stars on them. She was holding a stuffed rabbit I'd bought her for her 6th birthday. When she saw me, she didn't run into my arms. She looked away. "Hi, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Dad. I'm here to take you to my place. We can do anything you want this weekend, anything at all." She didn't say anything. Just stood there, small and pale in her purple pajamas, holding that rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her together. "Emma," I said. "Sweetheart, look at me." She looked at Karen instead. Karen put her hand on Emma's shoulder and made a face at me, sympathetic, like she was the victim in this scenario. "I think," the older officer said slowly, "that for today, the child should stay here. You can file another motion with the court if you want to clarify the custody arrangement. But we're not going to force a child to leave when she's clearly distressed." "She's distressed because her mother and grandmother have been telling her I'm dangerous," I said. I heard my voice rising and couldn't stop it. "I've never done anything to hurt her. I've never raised my hand to her. I've never—" I looked at Emma. "Baby, I would never hurt you. You know that, right?" She looked away again. The female officer stepped slightly in front of Emma, a subtle barrier between us. "Sir, I need you to step back to your vehicle now. I have a court order, and we've explained the situation. Come back Monday. Talk to your lawyer. File a motion. But right now, you need to leave." I stood there for another moment, looking at my daughter, trying to memorize her face, her posture, the way she was holding that rabbit, trying to burn into my memory the moment when I realized I was losing her. Then I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't go to my apartment. I drove to a parking lot behind a strip mall in Clintonville and sat in my car for 2 hours, just staring at nothing. My phone rang 3 times. Jennifer. I didn't answer. What was I going to tell her? That I had a custody order and it didn't matter? That my daughter wouldn't look at me? Around noon, I did call her back. She listened to everything without interrupting. And then she said something that made me understand how deep this actually went. "Ashley filed a restraining order against you this morning," Jennifer said quietly. "We just got the notification. She's claiming you made threats, that you showed up at the house and tried to force your way in, that Emma is afraid of you. The order is temporary right now, but the hearing is in 2 weeks." "That's a lie. I never threatened her. I never tried to force—" "I know," Jennifer said, "and we'll prove it. But Michael, you need to understand what we're dealing with here. Karen didn't change those locks on her own. Ashley authorized it. This is coordinated. They're building a narrative where you're a danger to Emma, and if that narrative takes hold in front of a judge—" She didn't have to finish. I understood. If the judge believed I was a threat, the restraining order would become permanent. Temporary custody would become supervised. Supervised would become nothing. I'd lose my daughter not because of anything I'd actually done, but because 3 people had decided to rewrite history, and they had lawyers and time on their side. I spent the next week in a state I can only describe as drowning. I went to work, went through the motions anyway, sat in meetings about foundation inspections and steel beams, while my mind was somewhere else entirely. My boss, Rick, pulled me aside on Thursday and asked if I was okay. I said yes. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push it either. I wasn't sleeping. I was living on coffee and the kind of anxiety that makes your chest feel tight all the time. I'd scroll through my phone at 3 a.m., looking at pictures of Emma, trying to understand where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too available? Not available enough? Had I let Karen poison her against me without fighting back hard enough earlier? The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Friday. Jennifer said we had a strong case. No credible threats, no evidence of violence, documentation of my custody rights. She said the judge would likely see through the obvious attempt to manipulate the system. But I wasn't confident. I was terrified. Thursday night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. "Mr. Richardson?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "This is Detective Morrison from the Columbus Police Department. We spoke briefly when you called the non-emergency line on Friday. I wanted to follow up with you about something that's come to my attention." My first thought was that they were calling to reinforce the restraining order, or tell me I needed to stay away from Emma. But Morrison's next sentence changed everything. "I've been reviewing the reports from the incident at your ex-wife's residence," she said. "And I've also been looking into some other matters related to Ms. Karen Hutchins. Did you know that she has a history with family court?" 3 different cases involving grandchild custody disputes? I didn't know that. My lawyer hadn't mentioned it. There's a pattern here, Morrison continued. In 2 of those cases, she successfully obtained temporary guardianship, and in both cases, the biological parent reported that the children were being coached to make false allegations. One case went to the State Bar Association. Nothing stuck, but it raised some questions. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because," Morrison said, "I have a daughter, and I've watched family court destroy good parents before. And I think you should know that the officer who responded to your situation yesterday, Officer Patterson, he's been flagged twice for not properly investigating family custody disputes. There's an internal review happening. It's not official, but it's happening. And we're looking at the incident report from Friday again, with fresh eyes." Hope is a dangerous thing. It made my hands shake worse than anxiety had. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Morrison said, "that you should come to the station tomorrow, before your hearing. Bring any documentation you have, custody orders, text messages, emails, anything that shows a pattern. We may have some information that would be relevant to a judge." I showed up at the Columbus Police Department at 7 a.m. the next morning, an hour before my hearing was supposed to start. Detective Morrison was waiting for me in an interview room. She was in her 50s, with gray streaks in her dark hair, and the kind of direct gaze that made you believe she actually cared about what she was saying. She laid out 4 pieces of paper on the table in front of me. "These are complaints filed against Karen Hutchins in the other 2 custody cases I mentioned," Morrison said. "Both parents reported identical behavior. Karen telling the grandchildren that their biological parent was dangerous, unfit, potentially abusive. Both parents reported that the children became increasingly hostile toward them over the course of a few weeks. Both parents said it was like watching someone gaslight a child in real time." I read through them. The similarities were shocking. The exact same accusations Emma was making, the same timeline of escalation. "There's more," Morrison said. She slid another document across the table. "We pulled the phone records from the incident yesterday. Your ex-wife called her lawyer at 8:15 a.m. The lawyer called us at 8:45. But you didn't show up until 9:30. Emma was put on the phone with the officers at 9:45. In the 30 minutes between when you arrived and when Emma came to the door, Karen had time to talk to her, to tell her things. We have a recording of that interaction from the body cam of the officer who spoke to Emma. Do you want to hear it?" I nodded. Morrison played the audio. It was just 30 seconds or so. Emma, small and scared sounding, saying, "Daddy yelled at Grandma, he's scary." And Karen, in the background, saying, "That's right, baby. That's why we need to keep you safe." "Your daughter didn't spontaneously decide you were scary," Morrison said. "She was told you were scary, and she's 8 years old, so she believed it. But here's what I want you to understand. We can prove this. The timing, the coaching, the pattern, and I think your judge needs to know about it." For the first time in a week, I felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope yet. It was something smaller and more fragile. It was a crack in the wall that had been closing in on me. "What do I do?" I asked. "You go to that hearing," Morrison said, "and you tell your lawyer to request that we be allowed to present evidence of witness coaching and pattern behavior. The judge can subpoena the body cam footage. The judge can look at those other cases. And then you let the system work the way it's supposed to." I walked out of that police station at 8:15 a.m., 20 minutes before I was supposed to be in Judge Mullen's courtroom. I called Jennifer and told her everything Morrison had told me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "This changes things," Jennifer said quietly. "Bring those documents. I'm going to request a continuance so we can properly introduce this evidence. But Michael, don't get your hopes up too high yet. This still isn't a guaranteed win." But it was something. It was a weapon I didn't have 24 hours ago. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't a bad father, that I wasn't the villain in this story. I walked into that courtroom at 8:40 a.m., sat down at the table next to Jennifer, and for the first time since Karen changed those locks, I felt like I had a chance. Judge Patricia Mullins entered the courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp, and the air in the room seemed to shift. She was a small woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, the kind of judge who'd seen every trick in the family law playbook and had no patience for new ones. I sat at the defense table with Jennifer, my hands folded in front of me. Across the room, Ashley sat with her lawyer, a slick guy named David Chen who'd cost her probably $5,000 just to show up. Karen wasn't in the courtroom, which surprised me until I realized that was probably strategic. Let the daughter be the focus, not the manipulative grandmother. Judge Mullins reviewed the restraining order petition first. Ashley's lawyer stood up and painted me as a man unraveling. He cited the incident at the house. He said I'd made threats. He said Emma was terrified. He said my obsessive documentation of custody exchanges proved I was unstable, not careful. I wanted to stand up and scream that I wasn't obsessive, I was protecting myself. But Jennifer had told me to stay silent until my turn. Then Jennifer stood. She was quiet for a moment, looking at Judge Mullins, and then she said something that made Ashley's lawyer shift uncomfortably. Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to introduce evidence of witness coaching and pattern behavior that directly contradicts the allegations in this petition. With your permission, I'd like to call Detective Sarah Morrison from the Columbus Police Department. Ashley's lawyer stood up. Objection. This is a restraining order hearing, not a criminal proceeding. Detective Morrison's presence is irrelevant. Judge Mullins looked at Jennifer over the top of her glasses. What's the relevance? The relevance, Jennifer said calmly, is that the allegations against my client were manufactured through a deliberate and documented pattern of coaching a minor to make false statements. There's evidence of this pattern in prior custody cases. And there's evidence from the body camera footage from the incident in question that shows exactly how that coaching occurred. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll allow it. Bring in the detective. Detective Morrison walked into the courtroom in full uniform. She was sworn in, and Jennifer walked her through it systematically. Morrison testified about the pattern she'd found in the prior cases, the identical accusations, the timeline of escalation, the sudden shift in how the grandchildren viewed their biological parents. In my professional opinion, Morrison said, looking directly at Judge Mullins, this is a classic case of parental alienation through coaching. The child in this case didn't independently decide her father was dangerous. She was told he was dangerous, and because she's 8 years old, she believed it. Ashley's lawyer tried to cross-examine her, but Morrison was unshakable. She had documentation. She had facts. She had the body camera footage. Then Jennifer asked for the footage to be played. The courtroom was silent as we heard Emma's small voice. Daddy yelled at Grandma, "He's scary," and Karen's voice underneath it. That's right, baby. That's why we need to keep you safe. Judge Mullins' face didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. After Morrison was excused, Jennifer called me to the stand. I testified about the custody arrangement. I testified about my relationship with Emma, the bike rides, the homework help, the bedtime stories. I testified about the timeline of events. I testified that I'd never threatened anyone, never raised my voice inappropriately, never done anything but try to be present for my daughter. When Ashley's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as obsessive for documenting custody exchanges. I didn't get angry. I just explained clearly and calmly that I'd been advised to document everything by my lawyer because I sensed a threat to my custody rights. That seemed like reasonable behavior, not unreasonable. And did you ever, he asked, threaten your ex-wife or her mother? No, I said, never. Did you ever attempt to force your way into the residence on Worthington Drive? No. I knocked on the door. I asked to see my daughter. When I was told to leave by police, I left. That was the truth. It was plain. It was undeniable. Then Ashley took the stand. She testified that I'd called her multiple times during the separation, that I'd shown up at her apartment unannounced, that I'd made her feel unsafe. Her lawyer was good. He made it all sound plausible, even though half of it was exaggerated or outright false. Yes, I'd called her, but not obsessively. Yes, I'd shown up at her apartment once to discuss custody arrangements. Jennifer's cross-examination was surgical. She got Ashley to admit that she'd been the one to initiate the divorce. She got her to admit that she'd been dating Derek for 4 months. She got her to admit that she'd never actually heard me make a threat. She was testifying to her feeling, not to facts. And then Jennifer asked the question that changed everything. Ms. Richardson, did you authorize your mother to change the locks on the residence where your daughter lives? There was a long pause. Ashley's lawyer was making cutting motions with his hand, trying to get her to stop, but Judge Mullins had already ruled that the question was relevant. We discussed it, Ashley said finally. But Karen made the final decision. Did you tell your daughter that her father was dangerous before he arrived at the house on Monday? Another pause. Another glance at her lawyer. I may have mentioned that he'd been difficult to deal with. Did your mother tell Emma that she needed to be kept safe from her father? Ashley didn't answer. She just looked away. Jennifer sat down. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Judge Mullins took a 30-minute recess. When she came back, she delivered her ruling from the bench. The restraining order petition is denied, she said, her voice crisp and final. I find that the allegations of threat and intimidation are not supported by the evidence. In fact, the evidence suggests a deliberate attempt to alienate a child from her biological parent through coaching and manipulation. This court finds such behavior deeply concerning and contrary to the best interests of the child. She paused, looking at Ashley directly. Furthermore, Judge Mullins continued, I am modifying the existing custody arrangement, effective immediately. Mr. Richardson will have sole legal custody of Emma, pending a full evaluation of Ms. Richardson's parenting fitness. Visitation with the mother will be supervised. Ms. Karen Hutchins is prohibited from residing in the residence where Emma lives or having any unsupervised contact with the minor. And I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation into whether counsel has been complicit in coaching the child. The courtroom went very quiet. Judge Mullins looked at me. Mr. Richardson, you'll have custody of your daughter effective tomorrow. There will be a follow-up hearing in 60 days to determine if supervised visitation can be expanded. I felt something inside my chest that I couldn't quite name. Not joy, exactly, because the victory felt hollow. My daughter had been used as a weapon, and that was something that couldn't be undone in a courtroom. But relief, yes, and vindication, and the knowledge that I could finally bring her home. Ashley was crying silently at her table. Her lawyer was already packing up his briefcase, calculating how much this was going to cost her. I didn't feel bad for her. I should have, maybe, but I couldn't access that emotion. She had made her choice. The judge stood to leave, then paused and looked back at the room. I want to be very clear, she said, that alienating a child from a loving parent is a form of emotional abuse. This court takes it seriously. Both Ms. Richardson and Ms. Hutchins should understand that future violations of this order will result in contempt charges and possible criminal referral. After she left, I sat in that courtroom for a moment, just breathing. Jennifer put her hand on my shoulder. You did it, she said quietly. You actually did it. That afternoon, I went to pick up Emma. Ashley answered the door. Karen was nowhere to be found, probably already packing. Emma was standing behind her mother, still wary, still uncertain. I knelt down to her eye level. Hey, buddy, I said. I'm going to take you to my place for a while. Your mom and I need to work some things out, but I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, and I'm never going to stop. She didn't run into my arms, but she took my hand. That was enough. The drive to my apartment was quiet. Emma stared out the window, still processing. But when we got there, I showed her the room I'd set up for her. New bed, her favorite books, a desk where we could do homework together. And slowly, over the course of that evening, something shifted. She started asking me questions about school, about my work, about whether we could go to the park on Saturday. By the time I tucked her into bed that night, she was sleeping peacefully, her hand curled around the stuffed rabbit she'd been clutching that morning on the porch. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. 2 months later, the follow-up hearing resulted in supervised visitation with Ashley, 2 hours on Saturday afternoons, with a court-appointed monitor present. Emma was cautious at first, but gradually, the wall that had been built between them started to come down. It would take time. Therapy would help. But the alienation had been broken. Karen filed a complaint against Judge Mullins, which went nowhere. She attempted to contact Emma, which violated the court order and resulted in a restraining order against her. She faded from our lives as quickly as she'd invaded it. As for me, I learned something that took me months to fully understand. The system, for all its flaws, does sometimes work. Not because it's perfect, but because there are people like Detective Morrison who see patterns, who give a damn, who are willing to step outside their job description to help a parent fight for their child. And sometimes, the truth, documented, presented calmly, backed up by evidence, is enough to overcome a lie that's been repeated 3 times. Emma is 10 now. She still lives with me most of the time. She sees her mom on weekends. She knows what happened, in an age-appropriate way. She knows that her grandmother tried to hurt me, and that there are grown-ups who do that sometimes. She knows that I fought for her, not with anger or threats, but with patience and documentation, and the help of people who believed in the truth. And I know that being a good parent sometimes means being willing to fight, even when fighting is the last thing you want to do.